Nestled in the deep valleys and dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains are stories as ancient as the very rocks that form their steep slopes. Our story begins in this isolated setting, in McDowell County, West Virginia, around 1923, where generations of families lived cut off from the outside world for decades. At the end of a road that turned impassable in harsh winter lived the Hollister family in a small log cabin. Their isolation was so complete that for 4 or 5 months each year, they saw no one but themselves. This seclusion would become the perfect backdrop for a tragedy spanning generations. The patriarch was Jeremiah Hollister, a tall, bony man with a thick beard and penetrating blue eyes. Widowed at 42, he raised his delicate-featured daughter, Martha, alone. Martha's mother, Sarah, had died during a difficult childbirth when the girl was only 6. The baby boy did not survive either. From then on, father and daughter lived in isolation in that small cabin. The closest neighbors were nearly 10 kilometers away, and visits were rare. The pastor from the small church tried to visit once a year, usually in summer. He noticed Martha, now 14, growing increasingly withdrawn, avoiding direct eye contact and keeping her arms crossed over her body. Jeremiah was always a strange man, says Elelina Davis, now 93, one of the few still alive who knew the Hollisters. Even before Sarah's death, he rarely came down to town. It was Sarah who bought supplies, always in a hurry, always looking over her shoulder as if she feared being followed. A strange dynamic between father and daughter was noted by local residents. On the rare occasions they appeared together at the village store, Martha seemed a shadow, always a step behind her father, responding only in monosyllables if someone tried to speak to her. The winter of 1937 was particularly severe in the mountains. It was during this winter that Martha, then 20, became pregnant with her first child. When spring arrived, Martha did not come down to town with her father. Rumors began when Jeremiah was seen buying baby clothes. "My daughter is expecting," was all he said, his face as impassive as the mountain rock. Suspicions grew among the locals. Martha had not been seen with any man, and no suitor had climbed the mountain to court her. The community began to whisper increasingly dark theories. Dr. William Foster, the region's only doctor, was finally called to the Hollister cabin on a rainy night in June 1938. Martha was in labor, and complications had forced Jeremiah to seek help. What Dr. Foster found in that cabin would haunt him for life. Martha, pale and fragile, gave birth to a girl whose facial features immediately alerted the experienced doctor to the possibility of consanguinity. The infant was born with characteristics typical of children from close kin, heart defects, extra fingers, and a visibly underdeveloped jaw. She survived only 3 days. Martha never named the father, but the doctor's suspicions were recorded in his diary, along with the disturbing observation that Jeremiah seemed more devastated than a grandfather would expect. "He held her as if she were his own daughter," wrote the doctor. "He cried in a way that made me look away, as if I were witnessing something too intimate, too sacred in its perversity." In those isolated mountains, where the law rarely reached, it wasn't uncommon for families to intermarry. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, all in an effort to keep lands within the family. But even in this context, certain boundaries were respected. The relationship between father and daughter was a taboo few communities tolerated. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Don't miss any shocking stories like this one that reveal the dark truths hidden in American families. Subscribe now to dive into humanity's darkest secrets. After the death of Martha's first daughter, a silence fell over the Hollister cabin. For almost a year, no one in town saw Martha. Jeremiah came down alone for supplies, avoiding conversation. In April 1939, Martha was pregnant a second time. The child, a boy named Elijah, was born at home with the help of a local midwife, Ida Mae Jenkins, who was called only at the last moment. "That house had a strange smell," Ida Mae reported years later. "Something that reminded me of a wounded animal, an odor of despair and resignation. And when I saw the baby, I understood why. The boy was born with visible deformities, fused fingers forming a kind of claw, heterochromia, one blue eye like Jeremiah's, one brown like Martha's, and an abnormally large head, a sign of hydrocephalus. "That boy won't survive the winter," Ida May told Jeremiah, who received the news with a nod. Surprisingly, Elijah survived not just that winter, but the next 5 years. He never learned to speak more than a few disconnected words, and his movements were limited. Martha carried him everywhere, even when he grew too big. In these years, Martha became pregnant twice more. The third child, a girl named Ruth, was born with less visible deformities, but her mental development was clearly compromised. The fourth child, another boy, was stillborn in 1944 and was buried in the small family cemetery behind the cabin. That family always had problems with babies being stillborn or dying early, explains Harlan Thompson, a local historian. Records show the Hollisters came to the mountains in the 1820s and since then married almost exclusively among cousins. This pattern created a concentration of problematic genes that manifested in increasingly severe ways. In 1945, tragedy struck again when Elijah, then 6, succumbed to pneumonia during a harsh winter. Martha was seen at the funeral holding 4-year-old Ruth's hand. Neighbors noticed Martha appeared to be pregnant again. Martha's fifth child was born in June 1946, a girl named Sarah in honor of Martha's deceased mother. Unlike her older siblings, Sarah appeared relatively healthy. Her eyes were a deep blue, almost identical to Jeremiah's, and her early development seemed normal. Sarah's apparent normality changed Jeremiah's behavior. He began taking her to town, exhibiting her with a pride locals found disturbing. He treated her as if she were his own daughter, not his granddaughter, recalls Clementine Parker, who worked at the grocery store. He kept showing how smart she was, how quickly she learned. The resemblance between them was undeniable. As Sarah grew, it became evident she had escaped the worst genetic consequences. At 5, she sporadically attended the local school in warmer months. Her teacher, Miss Abigail Wilson, noticed that despite some learning difficulties, Sarah was considerably more advanced than her sister, Ruth. It was through Sarah that the outside world began to glimpse the true nature of life in the Hollister cabin. On a rainy autumn day in 1952, Sarah arrived at school with a visible bruise on her face. When questioned by Miss Wilson, the girl finally spoke. "Daddy got angry because Mommy didn't want to sleep in his bed anymore," she said with a child's disconcerting innocence. "He says Mommy is his, that she always has been since Grandma died." Miss Wilson reported the incident to the local sheriff, John Buchanan, but with no concrete evidence beyond a child's account, he was reluctant to intervene. "Those mountain families have their own customs," said the sheriff. "It's not our role to interfere unless there's a clear and immediate danger." The winter of 1952-53 further isolated the cabin. When spring arrived, Martha was seen in town with Ruth and Sarah, but she appeared worn down, older than her 36 years. Most alarming was Jeremiah's absence. It was only in July 1953, when a lost hunter, Joseph Miller, passed near the Hollister property, that the truth came to light. Miller reported seeing a recent grave in the family cemetery. A rudimentary headstone bore Jeremiah Hollister's name and the date of his death, January 12, 1953. "I thought it strange no one in town knew he had died," Miller told the sheriff. "But the strangest thing was what I saw through the cabin window. Martha was sitting at the table with the 2 girls, and she seemed happy. It was as if a weight had been lifted." The summer of 1953 brought changes. With Jeremiah's death, Martha found a new freedom. She frequented the town more, established a small garden, and let Sarah attend school regularly. Ruth, though still limited, showed improved behavior. During this period, Martha met Jacob Wheeler, a middle-aged widower and carpenter who had recently moved to the region. Unlike most locals, he didn't listen to rumors. "Everyone has a past," he would say. "What matters is the present." The friendship between Martha and Jacob grew slowly, built on casual encounters. For a woman who had lived her entire life under oppressive control, Jacob's simple kindness was like water in the desert. In October 1953, Jacob asked permission to formally court Martha. The community reacted with shock and morbid curiosity. One Sunday after church, Clementine Parker approached Jacob. "You know who those girls' father is, don't you?" she asked, her voice low. Jacob, uncomfortable, replied he assumed it was Martha's deceased husband. Clementine let out a dry laugh. Martha was never married, Jacob. Those girls, their father is the same man who was Martha's father. Jeremiah Hollister kept his own daughter. You're getting involved with a cursed family. The revelation hit Jacob like a physical blow. He drove for hours before going to the Hollister cabin that night. Martha was on the porch as if waiting. You found out, didn't you? She asked, her voice calm and resigned. Jacob nodded. I understand if you never want to see me again, Martha continued. But before you go, I'd like you to hear my story. And so, under the Appalachian stars, Martha told her story. The abuse that began shortly after her mother's death. How at 14 she tried to run away, only to be found and chained to the bed for weeks as punishment. The pregnancies, the children born carrying the genetic weight of that forbidden union. I loved them, you know, she said, tears streaming. Despite how they were conceived, despite the deformities. They were my children. I just wanted to protect them. And Jeremiah, Jacob finally asked, how did he die? Martha looked at the sky for a long moment. The winter was harsh. He got sick. Pneumonia, probably. He refused to see a doctor. One day, he simply didn't wake up. There was an almost imperceptible hesitation in her words. On the day he died, I felt I could breathe for the first time in decades. It's terrible to say, but it was as if a shadow had been lifted. Jacob took Martha's hands. No one should go through what you went through. At that moment, Sarah appeared at the door, her blue eyes, Jeremiah's eyes, wide in the darkness. Mommy. It's all right, dear. Mr. Wheeler and I are just talking. She looks like him, Martha said softly after Sarah went inside. Sometimes I see him looking back at me, and my heart freezes. But then she smiles, and I remember she is not him. She is herself, despite everything. Have you ever wondered how many Marthas are hidden out there, suffering in silence, trapped in cycles of abuse that pass from generation to generation? Leave in the comments, break the silence to show we are attentive to these stories that need to be told. The following months brought a near-normal routine. Jacob visited regularly, helping with repairs. Martha transformed, the woman who once flinched at noise now occasionally smiled. Their relationship became the main topic of local gossip. Meanwhile, Martha struggled with internal demons. Nightmares frequently woke her. Jacob gently suggested she talk to someone. She finally agreed to see Dr. Richard Montgomery, a visiting psychiatrist. With his support, Martha slowly began to process her trauma. As the girls grew, questions arose. Sarah began asking about her father. Your grandfather Jeremiah took care of us after your father left, Martha said carefully. Sarah, with a child's perspicacity, sensed there was more but learned not to press. In 1956, 3 years after Jeremiah's death, Jacob proposed. I know you, Martha, he said. Not just your past, but who you are now. A survivor. They married in a small ceremony at the cabin. Life as Mrs. Wheeler brought Martha a new sense of legitimacy. Jacob became a patient, gentle father figure to the girls. But the past resurfaced in 1959 when 13-year-old Sarah found her mother's old diary in the attic. The yellowed pages contained the raw truth. When Martha found her diary open on her lap, silent tears on her face, she knew. Is it true? Sarah asked, her voice broken. Grandpa Jeremiah was my father. Yes, Martha finally said, the word a painful sigh. Yes, it's true. The revelation shook the family. Sarah became withdrawn. I'm a freak, she told Martha. What's wrong with me that we haven't discovered yet? Jacob suggested they consult a genetics specialist. Dr. Benjamin Rosen in Philadelphia examined Sarah. You are not a freak, he told her. He explained how recessive genes work and assured her that if she married someone unrelated to the Hollister lineage, her children would likely be healthy. The consultation marked a turning point. Sarah began to separate her origins from her identity. She was Sarah Wheeler, a young woman with her own dreams. Life found a new balance. Ruth's quilts and tapestries gained recognition beyond the community. In 1962, Sarah, now 16, met Michael Prescott, a professor's son studying Appalachian culture. When she told him her history, fearing rejection, he surprised her. "I know what it's like to carry the weight of family history, Sarah," he said. Their romance flourished. Sarah earned a scholarship to study nursing at West Virginia University. In 1965, she and Michael married in a university chapel. Martha, radiant, watched her daughter walk toward a future she herself could never have imagined. That same year, Dr. Montgomery suggested Martha share her story anonymously to help professionals and other victims. Her case, published under the pseudonym Patient H, became one of the most cited in emerging literature on trauma and resilience. In 1970, Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep at 29 due to heart complications. Sarah, now a respected nurse and mother of 2 healthy children, returned for the funeral. Martha, 53, watched her grandchildren play in the mountain clearing. "They'll never know, will they?" she asked Sarah. "About Jeremiah?" "About everything. One day, when they're older, I'll tell them a version," Sarah replied. "Enough for them to understand where we came from, what we overcame. I want them to know about their grandmother's strength. How you broke a cycle that could have continued for generations." "Do you think it's possible?" Martha asked, "really breaking the cycle after so many generations?" Sarah smiled. "Look at them, Mom. Look at me, at Michael. At you and Jacob. We've already broken it." In that moment, as the sun set behind the Appalachians, Martha Hollister Wheeler finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps the sins of the fathers need not be visited upon the children, that with love, courage, and truth, even the darkest stories could give way to new beginnings. The years passed. The Hollister cabin, abandoned after the deaths of Martha and Jacob in 1985, slowly returned to the earth. The story now lives in academic memory, in studies on abuse and resilience, and in the stories passed down through Sarah's family. What was once a cycle of abuse became a narrative of overcoming and hope. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Don't miss any impactful stories like this one that reveal the dark truths hidden in American families. Subscribe now to continue exploring humanity's darkest secrets. If you watched until here, leave a comment saying "I watched until here." Don't forget to leave your like and share this story.